Well, on the Western side, just
Uh-huh.
see if we can agree on this. It seems like from the Western perspective, they've decided that we don't have free will.
No.
It
From
seemed to
I
me
know.
that they had.
I know.
Phails at philosophy.
Because I think
Is that the author or is that
from the perspective of the late 20th century Western conversation amongst analytic philosophers he's talking about.
so this is imbalance?
This is a very, like there's a much larger conversation about free will happening in Western philosophy than is represented in this chapter.
And so you're saying I've got a limited view on this, but
Yeah. But
can we agree that this limited
Right,
view would
Yes,
lead
yeah.
me to that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Because it seems like once you get past this other one, this next argument, then he gives you another one around, but you have emotions. You're flooded with emotions, and your emotions are going to dictate your discernment.
So,
and then, it's like one after the other, it's like there's no free will.
when we look at this conversation that occurs that it's talking about amongst people trying to work out how free will works, is I think what we realize is a way of explaining the world which relies on rational coherence.
Rational coherence means
that we
can expect the thing to happen before to happen again.
Not exactly. It's even more because
there's a reliable world. Is that coherence?
It's more just sort of basic things like the principle of non-contradiction, right? Which is like either determinism is true or indeterminism is true, right? Like that kind of rational coherence of how we understand those things.
Okay.
That's necessary for explaining the world. One that's contested, like in
impermanence, everything changes all the time, and nothing's ever.
And if you go into things like the Madhyamika tradition that we were looking at, there's a sense that impermanence conceptually is something you have to give up too, right? The emptiness.
Of emptiness,
right? And so that's we would need that coherence, so that it relies on that, and that a principle of causation is there, right? That we're gonna explain the world with a principle of causation. We already talked about why Hume suggests that we don't have grounds to believe that a principle of causation is anything but a convenient way for our brains to understand the world. Because the only way we have understanding of a principle of causation is because we've assumed it to explain the principle of causation, right? Because
this like feedback loop,
right? We have to rely on this notion that if I see, I guess that's not the best way to describe it. It's more that we just never see it. We never see causation. We see the pool ball hit the other pool ball, and we see the correlation happen.
We don't see the ball hit us.
We see the simultaneity. No, we see the simultaneity.
Uh-huh.
But that sort of magical link between the things, that this is what causes that to go. We don't see any causation. We see a ball come and we see a ball go.
Right.
There's some magical moment that this ball causes that
energy transfer there.
Right.
Yeah.
We don't see that. And even if we get down with the microscope and see the lines of it, we don't see the actual causation. Causation is not something we observe. Causation is a theory we use to explain what we observe. And I think that's...
What do you mean we don't observe it? We totally observe it.
We do not observe causation. We observe simultaneity.
If I'm going to drop this pen, and I think this is not the first time I've dropped this pen together, I saw my hands...
You saw a situation...
And then I saw the pen drop.
That's simultaneity. That's not causation. You saw two things happen.
The pen wouldn't drop if I didn't
That's a theory you're using to explain what just happened.
What are you talking about, Grant? Look, I'm going to do it again.
Right.
I'm going to hold this. If I don't release the script, that pen's not going to drop. There's no world where I hold onto the pen and it drops.
Right. That's a great theory. It seems to explain.
It's not a theory. It is a fact.
No,
is this the law of nature?
No, the fact is, when I open my hand, the pen drops.
Because right now we have the idea of the permanence of gravity?
No, erase that. When I open my hand, keep to the thing you're seeing.
Yes.
When I open my hand,
the pen drops.
What do you see?
The pen drops.
Now, in terms...
But the pen drops because I open my hand.
But the minute you say, because I opened my hand, you're not describing what happened. You're giving me a theory about what happened.
But that's the most reliable theory.
Sure, absolutely.
That's gravity.
It's a great
We're talking
theory.
about gravity now.
Yeah, it's a great theory. It seems to be very operational for explaining the world. Absolutely.
But
so that's
when we take this and apply it to, we can't, our brain is not, okay, this is how I'm making sense of this. Our brain is, we would have to know all the known knowns, all the unknown knowns, and all the unknown unknowns in order for us to have things that weren't theories, things that were like, that's a fact, that is what happened, to describe it. And since we don't have all that information, all we can do is say, the pin dropped, I opened my hand, the pin dropped. Because this is simplistic. But once we start to apply that in way more complex kind of models, it's harder to have a theory that is reliable or even believable, or like if it's like, why did I get a divorce? Right? If when you apply it to something that's far more complex, it's not like I release my grip and now I don't have a wife anymore. Right.
Yeah, and I think that's and I think that the problem is that in a modern Western context, what we've experienced is the ability to get those increasingly complex sets of knowledge that seem to support this causal framework, right? It seems now part of the conversation, you remember in this conversation about determinism, quantum theory comes up because of quantum indeterminacy.
Yeah, where you can look at something and it changes space
and I can't
direction
remember when
and time.
that happens, if it's like the
It just
70s or 80s, but you know,
like disappears here and it shows up somewhere else, and it's like,
and he talks about Keynes' argument that like this creates a problem for determinacy, right? And then the response is like, well, indeterminacy has just as much problem. Now, remember what he talks about, and he's kind of dismissive of Keynes, but I think what Keynes is saying is something much more interesting than what he represents, which is it's not that quantum indeterminacy opens up, like when we look at quantum indeterminacy, oh, it's quantum, now we have free will. That's not what Keynes is saying. He says it creates problems for determinacy as a macro theory of how the world works, is that in quantum states, we don't see clear causation,
because
we see probabilities.
Can't predict what's going to happen there.
And that lack of ability to predict is understood within at least the frameworks of quantum theory that they're working with, right? You know, and I think this is a debate within theoretical physics. Is that quantum indeterminacy about an insufficient amount of knowledge?
That's what I was thinking.
Or is
we just don't have the peripheral. We don't have the
or is that quantum indeterminacy fundamental?
It seems like it disappears, but that's just because we don't have the.
Now, I'm not a quantum physicist, so I don't necessarily understand the math, right?
Me neither.
But what people who do understand the math seem to tell me is that within the framework of physical theories about the universe and how it works, that indeterminacy is hard-baked into the framework. It's not a problem of insufficient data. It's a problem of the basic way we understand how the universe works.
When you're saying indeterminacy, in my mind, I replace that with the chaos and randomness.
Right.
Is that true?
Well, I mean, it's interesting because like when you think about quantum indeterminacy, it's not exactly chaos and randomness.
Like they don't know where it disappears from one place and it goes somewhere that they can't predict, right?
But there's a probability to it, right? And a consistent
that it will disappear.
Yeah, that it will disappear.
And move and
given
reappear.
A number of cases, it will disappear
and reappear a certain number of times or something.
Right, exactly.
Is there? We're totally outside of where, you know.
That's how I'm understanding it.
Right.
Yeah, like that's that we're talking about ways of explaining physical reality that require use of probabilities instead of clear causation. And that's not just because we can't analyze sufficiently to get that causation. Yeah, that's weird. I mean, if that's the case, that creates a problem for determinism. I mean, I think if what seems to be the narrative that comes out of this experimental investigation of the fundamental structures of the universe in particle theory.
Mm-hmm.
Suggests that on the most fundamental level, the universe isn't causal.
Man, what just came to my mind
Like-
was, how can we talk about a fundamental level of the universe in a world where reality doesn't have a ground? I
Well,
just went back to another chapter and was
right.
like, isn't there something below this?
Right. And maybe, I mean, and that goes back to your original sort of observation about getting God out of the problem of evil.
Yeah.